Um, and I'm going to go ahead. From what I understand, we only have 40 minutes of record time on this free Zoom.
Oh,
So I guess I'll go ahead and hit resume recording and we can go from here.
Okay.
okay.
So I didn't see any format for this. Was there a format that they wanted us to follow?
I didn't see one either.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the syllabus.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
From what I understanding was just maybe to pick up one of the sermons that we did, and then just maybe have a discussion about how we feel about each other's sermons, and basically giving a review.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, who's first?
I mean, I feel like we could do. I think for like in some ways it might be really difficult to try to recollect like everybody's sermons. So I mean, we can
Right.
maybe like keep it open, like try to pose questions and stuff like that. Like, what are some things that you guys have found challenging? I guess
That's
like
good.
this semester.
Yeah.
Like one of the questions I wanted to ask y'all, and this is it's not a very like seminary question, but it's like every time I preach, my mouth gets so insanely dry that like I don't know. I've tried hydrating the night before. I've tried hydrating the day of, but my mouth just gets so extremely dry. And so I was like, do you guys share that same problem? I've asked my pastor about it. He says he puts a mint in his mouth. I can't talk with a mint in my mouth. So anyways, so I feel like we could maybe ask questions like that.
That's a good starting one.
Am I the only one that struggles with just like a dry mouth after like, I don't know.
And that happens for me as well. But for me, it's like the audience size is not really big usually, so it's not really too awkward to put the cup of water in front of me, like on the desk and pulpit. But I saw your the sermon. I saw your audience is really large audience there, right? Huge
The second
congregation. So I feel like it may be some little awkward if you just keep drinking water in the middle of giving a sermon.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if that works, and then you can give it a try. Maybe drinking water.
Yeah. No, I had a major issue. I did my sermon last night for this one that we're turning in, and I've kind of been under the weather, and my mouth was so dry yesterday, and I felt the same awkwardness. I thought, man, I don't want to pause every second and go take a sip of something to drink just to kind of keep the mouth moist. But that's a hard thing. I think it's something that as speakers we're just going to always struggle with and try and figure out what we're comfortable with. And I think for me it's often nerves. When I find myself getting really really dry mouth, I'm getting nervous where in front of people. I'm feeling like I'm not doing well. I'm not communicating well, and that's when I find myself getting really parched.
Yeah, I mean, I drink a lot of water before I go up. I don't know. I'm a teacher though, like so I teach like I don't know. I guess I talk. I feel like I talk so much that I don't really get that thirsty.
Yeah.
But the nervousness thing, yes, and some like Nick, I think that's a really good point. When I'm nervous, my ears are like on fire every time I speak. I am like when I get nervous, my ears are really warm. One of my practical things, I guess I have weird ears because I can't get the mic to fit on my ear a lot of times. So my whole time I'm just trying to keep it on there. But I like the ones that go over both ears and then kind of like those are the Cadillac of mics, I feel like. But I have found I feel weird to take a drink of water just because when you're mic'd, it's like
Yeah,
just
yeah.
Right.
It catches
Yeah.
I feel
everything.
bad for everyone who's listening.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good question. I know that maybe some of y'all have mentioned this, like I guess in our first discussion post, but I guess as a way of reminder, how many of y'all are teaching like on a week-to-week basis or a frequent basis? I think that would probably be. So I'll go first. I haven't actually preached probably since 2015. Well, no, that's not. Yeah, I think 2016 actually. When I took the introduction to preaching class, I had to do a sermon through that. So I'm not frequently like preaching. I do small group stuff, but that's just a totally different context. So
Mhm.
so it's been really cool to have opportunities this semester. So
Yeah, even for me, like I started preaching pretty much when I started taking this class actually, because I'm still like, in a church, like a Korean immigration church where I'm in a position of being an evangelist. So it's pretty much my dad actually giving an old sermon, and for me, I'm giving a weekly basis of Bible study most likely. But ever since I joined the army and serving as the Army Reserve chaplain, and I got a couple of opportunities where I stand up a pulpit and giving a sermon like that. So I feel like, just like you mentioned, I think it's the like atmosphere and the structure of the sermon and the Bible study. It's really really different. So I'm kind of like struggling in sometimes like, for Bible study I prepare like this structure. So like a very class style. But in a sermon, you have to make a like illustration and also application and introduction and very different. So watching you guys and giving a sermon, I feel like wow, that's how it's supposed to be. Like I learn a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
It
I
was
teach.
just this semester that I took a position within my church, and it's a strange position because there was already a youth pastor there, but he
Mhm.
had so many other things on his plate, and they were looking to hire a music and youth pastor. And while I was fairly new to the church, had only been there for about a year, and I just told him, "Hey, I've had youth pastor experience before. I if you guys can use me, I was already teaching a little bit in the church. If you guys can use me, I'd love to maybe come on and help if I could." And one thing led to another, and I came on as part time at the church as a youth pastor. And so it was in the middle of this semester that I took on that position. And so now I'm teaching. I'm teaching to the youth every Wednesday night, and so I have that opportunity to teach the youth. And so I see preaching or teaching youth like what I do on Wednesday night different than preaching in front of a congregation on Sunday morning. I view it different. It's more formalized to the context of a larger congregation when I do preach on Sunday mornings. And I haven't had that opportunity to preach at my church yet. December 1st is going to be my first Sunday to preach to the whole church. And so, yeah, that's nerve wracking all together there. So, but to the youth, it's a weekly basis now for me.
Nick, what church are you at? I'm just curious.
Trinity Church in Marble Hill. Um, it's in Pickens County. Um, are you familiar with Georgia?
With where?
You're in Georgia, right?
No, my wife's from Georgia. I'm in Kentucky.
Oh, okay, okay. Um, It's a really, really, really small town north of Atlanta, about
Okay.
an hour and a half.
Okay. Hour and a half north of Atlanta.
Yep.
So you're close to the border?
Not all the way up there. No, I would have to go about another hour.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I'm curious. Nick, I'd like to come back to your comment about you teaching to the youth, and I just had some questions on your like teaching style and how you go about prep and everything. But I teach to students as well every Wednesday night. So I teach typically every Wednesday night during the school semesters. I'm going on my 4th year doing student ministry, and I teach at a Christian school as well. So um, I teach a lot of English classes, and then I do their devotion, which is about a 5-10 minute devotion each day to the student body. So I've had opportunities, and I'm starting to, and one of my big things that I'm working towards is what y'all were saying, hoping to have more opportunities to preach to the whole congregation. And so that's something that's been, and sometimes that's on Sunday nights, which is a pretty smaller crowd. On a Sunday morning, we would maybe have 600-700. On a Sunday night, it's maybe like about 70. So it's, a lot smaller, but still some good experience. But do you mind, Nick, can I ask you, I don't want to hijack the conversation or anything.
No, go ahead.
Nick, on your first, I think it was the first sermon. It's the first one or the second one. You used. I was really interested in. I thought it was really interesting how you used the Stephen Curtis Chapman video. Was that was you,
Yep.
right, Nick? Yeah.
Yep,
And so you used some different methods, which I thought was really interesting. And so I'm just curious, when you go about prepping for like your First Thessalonians 5 sermon, like what's your prep look like? And how is it different than preparing to preach to like the congregation?
Well,
and I guess
so
I'm sorry,
with it,
and I guess that's to everyone too. Like, how do you prep differently for different contexts? But sorry, go on, Nick.
So I think teaching youth is a little bit different than teaching adults. Youth, for me, what I've found more effective is keeping the message singular. I think with adults, you can have some points that build on each other, but with youth, I like to keep the message real simple. And so, what is the whole main point of the sermon? And I understand that with adults, we need to do the same thing, but especially with youth, it needs to be maybe one sentence that they can walk away with. And what I found work, and I hope it works, is finding illustrations like the Stephen Curtis Chapman video, and playing that for the guys to help build an illustration. So what I've been going through with my youth is a little bit, it has been difficult to do more expository sermons, because what I'm doing is I'm walking through our church's statement of faith with our students. And so I have more of a doctrinal theme that I'm approaching rather than a passage. And so the prep is different for a doctrinal theme than it is maybe more of an expository sermon. And so while expository and exposition is my preference, what we've been going through doesn't necessarily lend that way. So for my prep here lately, it's been trying to find things that match up with that theme that we're going through, and preparing around that theme. But you'll see in this last one, I preached through the book of Habakkuk, and I took a big approach to the whole 3-chapter book in one sermon. So I bit off a lot to do one message in that. But it's been this message that I've just done this week has been different than my last two. So as for preparation for that, it was much more in-depth into scripture rather than more of a thematic approach. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Anthony or Tim, is it Tim or Timothy?
Either way is fine. It's
Okay.
Timothy. Yeah, Timothy.
Do you all like have different ways you prep for different audiences? Or?
Yeah, I think I kind of do. But first, so far, I would have done like two different kinds of audience, I can say. It's the young adults and youth. For young adults, like, when I have to preach or giving a Bible study with them, usually they have a more familiar with the Bible, like in context, the story of the Bible. So I will be more focusing on like expository and exegetical, emphasis. Like I always go when I preparing a sermon, like, or a Bible study contents. Now I'll always refer to the original text first, then I try to build up on it from the original text. So when I'm basically presenting my message to the audience, then I'll mainly talk about what the original text says and comparing to the translated text, so that what it means and how can then we can go about making an application based on that original text meaning there. So that's what I would do mainly for that audience. But for youth audience, then I'll, because they're very young, and so they're not really familiar with the Bible stories. And if I make the same focus on the original text, like the young adults audience, then they'll be easily get bored, right? So I'll in order for me to intrigue their more interest, and I'll, one thing that I do is, always I feel like they have a one thing in lack is like it's hard for them to imagine how real the God's existence is before I talk about anything in the Bible. So one thing I try to do and mainly focus is try to make giving them a lot of like proof, evidence, like outside of the Bible, where I made a kind of book as well earlier. So according to that book, and I try to bring more stories and like a scientific evidence, or even small like the biblical evidence that, or historical evidence, I try to bring to them, and they seems to be more interested in, oh, then it's real, and it's really God, it's real. Then from that we start on learning then what God says, and who God is, and how important it is for us to believe in Him, something like that.
Yeah, for me, I this semester at least, I really haven't had the opportunity to preach in very drastic, I guess, different contexts. And I think I would probably agree with everybody else's like differences in prep work. I think that I've found Dr. Pullman's kind of rubric really helpful, even in like trying to think through what prep could look like. So, starting off with exegetical accuracy and just getting into the word and doctrinal substance and stuff like that. And then moving on to things like vivid illustrations and pointed application. I do think that there is probably more of a difference when it comes to prep when you get to those things like illustrations and applications, especially given that some of y'all are serving in like student ministry, giving really pointed application to high schoolers about, whatever it may be, like identity or, self-worth, or, as opposed to like a larger congregation, application could be more general. And I found that to be the case for me. I've wanted to try to be more precise with my applications, more engaging, trying to get it into people's living rooms, and not so like 30,000 feet in the air, theoretical in a sense. But I've found it a lot easier to do that depending on like where I'm at. So it was a lot easier for me to do things like that when I had the opportunity to preach at my own church. And I found in my prep time when I was going to churches like in the area, I shied away from trying to make very, very pointed application just because I didn't know where their sheep were, and so they were more general. I feel like as far as if I'm thinking through the 7 points of his rubric, I would think like the first 4 of them would be pretty much the same across the board. The first 4 and maybe the last one, but the big differences would probably be in the illustrations that you use in the application to try to engage whatever audience you're around. So, but I say that not having very much of an opportunity to try to like work around that this semester. So,
Thomas, I was going to ask you. You asked me about the Stephen Curtis Chapman video. Was that something that stood out to you in like a good or a bad way? What was your thoughts on that?
Oh, it was just different from I mean it not bad, not bad at all, especially given your context. It was just it was unique to me. I don't think in our other, like, I'm trying to remember everyone else's sermons. I just think that I just don't remember seeing it in another one, and so it just clued me into your context. And but man, I was just gonna say, like, so no, there wasn't anything like good or bad or anything like that. I mean, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was applicable. That story is a pretty incredible story. I really appreciated you seemed, Nick, I guess, I know that on the rubric it did say something about like talking about each other's sermons, and so I can't remember everything. I'm just kind of scanning through some of my points, but I really, you were really comfortable with your audience. I remember that you joked with them, which is really good, and I think important with students especially. There has to be I think there kind of has to be cracks in your, appropriate cracks that you allow in your in the I guess you're preaching, not facade like it's fake, but just they got to see you're a real person. I think that makes it a lot of your application helpful. And I just noticed that was something you were really, really good with. I liked your, oh, you, Nick, one of the things you said, you can fix your behavior, but only God can fix your heart. I remember you saying that. I thought that was really, really helpful, and is very applicable. And I think that a lot of times with students, we can just want them to be good. Like we can just want to like manufacture good students. And I just, like I said, it's not the gospel though. And so there's kind of a lot more vine work and trellis work to use the illustration to be done there. But it's what needs to be said. So I'm kind of looking back through everyone's first sermon and trying to remember everyone's, but it was, yeah, that's what I remember. One of the things about yours though, Nick.
One of the things that I've tried to stay away from, my first youth ministry position was right outside of college in 2006, and I was went straight in as a youth pastor, didn't have a clue what I was doing. And that was kind of back when I was a cage stage Calvinist. And I didn't have a clue about anything. And what I found myself doing was bringing really, really good truth to people that had no application. And I found myself being very heady in my approach, and again, bringing really good information, but I wasn't able to reach the heart. And so I think in ministry, sometimes we operate like a pendulum. We go swing back and forth, where we go through a season where we're very heady and very academic almost in our approach with things. And then we realize, wow, I might need to swing a little bit back this direction. And maybe I've swung a little bit to and thinking through my sermons for this class, I can recognize in myself that maybe I've swung a little bit too far to one side, where it's not, the information isn't as robust as maybe as I would like, but I'm reaching more of the heart than I am the head. And so I think having discussions like this have been really good. Um, but one thing I definitely don't want to do, especially as a youth pastor, is reach someone's head but never their heart. Those two have to go hand in hand. And so my approach to preaching and my approach to preparation is this doing both? Is this giving them information that can make them think through how to change a heart? Because I want it to do both, change the head and the heart.
And can I ask Anthony on your first sermon? I remember your doctrinal, like you prepped for that. Like you didn't just wing that one. And I think you had some really good, I think, doctrinal substance, which is sometimes something I struggle with. Like Nick, just thinking about kind of the flip of that. Sometimes I struggle with doctrinal substance in a sense. Like I don't always use doctrinal terms. Like I may not say penal substitutionary atonement, like, but I'm trying to get them to see what the concepts behind that are. But Anthony, I was just curious, what's your, like, from start to finish, like what's your prep for the message look like? Are you a manuscript guy? Are you do you use commentary? I'm just curious. I know I liked your doctrine, thought it was good in there, and so just curious what you do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed about the class is I think that that's maybe what Nicholas was talking about. I think I emphasize that, and it was a strong point of maybe that sermon if it had like some strengths, but maybe had like the weakness that like you're talking about. Like I think that first sermon, it may have struggled to like engage people's hearts, or I've been thinking a lot about like theology that meets people in their living rooms. So anyways, I appreciate that. But yeah, as far as like how much to put into a text, I think, and this kind of may seem abstract, but it's like if it's necessary to understand the text, like so, if, like with that first sermon in First Peter, I knew that new birth was a really big thing, and so it's hard to understand maybe like the indicative, like the imperatives that he's calling to if you don't understand the indicative of the new birth, like the reality of the new birth. And so I try my best to like see what's necessary, doctrinal, and I think it's good that you note that you don't have to use doctrinal language, which may be a temptation for seminary students, less maybe of a temptation for student ministry, right? Because they're like, what is that? But yeah, as far as prep goes though, I try to spend, and prep time for me is really long, given that like I'm just not in the practice of this. So I assume what may take y'all like say a couple hours will probably take me twice the amount of time. It just takes me a really long time to do prep work for sermons. But I try to spend at least, let's say, so if I'm working through, like say I have a week to do it, I'm probably spending 2/3 of the time just with the text. So like reading it, creating outlines, doing arkings, trying to find out phrases, and trying to come up with my own like illustrations from the text, applications from the text. I've found it helpful for me to have it like on a big page or something like that, so I can just write all over it. And so I find that helpful.
You handwrite it?
No. So I'll print it out on like a big page, and then I'll make sure that I have margins, and I'll use different color pencils and stuff like that to try to connect certain things, themes or words or stuff like that. So I think most of the time I try to do that. I try to push off commentaries as far off as I can, which I have yet to preach a sermon where I haven't looked through commentaries. And so I try to leave that towards the end of my prep time. And then usually, if I haven't already started making applications from the text, like throughout the week, I definitely towards the end of the week would like spend the rest of the time trying to think of illustrations and applications. So that's just like a brief, I guess, what it may look like if it was in the context of like a week that I had. So
Well, maybe this is a good question for all of us. How long does maybe one of our sermons that we've done this semester, how long, if you would have to give an average, how long does it take all of us to prepare?
So how long from the start of the week to the how hours?
Yeah, how many hours does it take on average for you to prepare the message that you gave?
So mine are different. For the ones like for my Wednesday night ones, like for the weekly ones, it probably takes me 5 to 6 hours total to prep those. Now that's not, and that's like on a weekly basis. Like the start of the semester, I do a lot more reading for the series, so I think a lot of that helps to inform, especially if I'm teaching through a book. I do a lot more prep work, I guess, on the front end of the series, trying to understand the book, kind of like what it sounds like what you did with Habakkuk, trying to understand how the whole book works, trying to get uh, where things are moving. So I guess doing Anthony, kind of what you were talking, an arc, but for the whole book, sort of. And so that probably takes me a couple of days where I'm taking maybe 4 or 5 hours out of the afternoon trying to get all of that done. But then on a weekly basis, yeah, I'd say to actually type out my message notes, I would probably say 4 or 5 hours. Now, um, I don't for preaching on Sundays. Just with my pastor, sometimes I'll find out on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for Sunday, and so I'll have like whole days just committed to that because I just don't have a lot of prep time. So I'll take the pretty much 12 hours on Friday, and then 12 hours on Saturday. And then, so when that happens, and I need to get better about that. I need to have a sermon as part of that's my fault. I need to have a sermon in my back pocket anyway. So that's, but for a typical week, it would probably be about 6 hours, just message, writing, I guess.
yeah, for me, it's quite a lot more. It's probably taken me on average anywhere between like 15 to 18 hours to do prep. Yeah, so it's a whole bunch for me, and I think that that's just part of like just not, I guess, having those gears going. At least just in the context of like preaching on a Sunday morning. I thought that it probably wouldn't take as long just because I've been doing like small group Bible studies, kind of like Sunday school kind of stuff for a long time, but that didn't seem to translate like I thought it did. And so, yeah, it's taken me a good bit for this semester, but I do think that it's gotten better over the course of the semester. So, but yeah, that's it for me. It's about 15 to 18 hours prep.
I'd probably say about 18 hours for me, or 16 hours, 2 8-hour days. Um, I'm with youth. I spend a lot of time doing the visual side of it with the PowerPoint because I feel like that's very important for the youth, whereas that's not as important with adults in a larger congregation. But Yeah, I would say probably two full days of prep, so around that 16 hour.
I think that for me, it varies depending on whether it is just the Bible study or like a sermon. But I never actually, to be honest, I never monitor myself and how many hours to be exactly it takes for me to prepare full contents. But for Bible study, I've been doing it for many years, and I pretty much made my own booklet to follow through. So it wouldn't take much more time. Just before I go to have a Bible study group, then I would just review the contents one more time. So it wouldn't take much more time. But for sermon, it takes, I think, much more. So for me, depending on the characteristics of the audience, I'll think about first and what kind of themes and topic I should bring to the sermon. So once I try to keep throughout the week, I try to keep brainstorming myself and like, oh, what is the message that I have to bring on Sunday? And then once I pick up the right topic, then I'll just commit one day, full whole day, preparing the sermon, the message. So I would say, yeah, like 12 hours, and yeah, literally I just sit on the desk and open up the Bible and on the laptop in front of me, with the Bible software. I would just keep searching and making a sermon. So it takes me like pretty much whole day. Yeah, like 12 hours, I would say.
Yeah, so one of the questions that I had, and this is, and I'll first say this is just an encouragement for y'all. As far as it goes to like helpful delivery, man, I think you guys have been nailing that. And one of the ways in particular that I thought that every one of y'all have been doing really good is like getting the mood of the text to be the mood of your tone. So whether it's, First Thessalonians or it's Jonah, I think that you all have done a really good job with like, I guess like the timbre of your voice to match the timbre of the text, which has been really encouraging. And then other things too, like having coordinated like hand motions that like align with like he's going down deep or like they moved over that way. Like you guys have done a good job. I know, Thomas, I wrote down on one of your reviews, you were using a mic.
Yeah.
You did really good transitioning the mic from right hand to left hand. It wasn't like this, like, oh, let me do that, or like, let me grab just like a big abrupt disruption of like, let me grab a glass of water or anything like that. It was just seamless. So I thought that was encouraging. I found it really difficult though, to kind of, I know one of the things that I've gotten as far as like I guess like a weaker point is with delivery. And so I guess my question is, have there been things that y'all have done to help that to be more dynamic? Because I know even with the last sermon that I had, I'm going to post it up maybe tomorrow. I tried to be more dynamic, I guess, in my like inflections and stuff like that, but it just ended up coming off as very inauthentic. Like it didn't sound like Anthony. And so, I just, I guess I'm having a hard time trying to figure out like, how do I kind of broaden my voice out of this kind of like these parameters to be a little bit more dynamic, which is helpful to be engaging, so. Do I just need to listen to more Piper?
I think for me, I either have an on-off switch, right? Like I'm either manuscript and reading it, and with the occasional looking up to make sure there's that engagement there, or I operate more out of an outline, and I allow myself to be a little bit more free with my words. And it's just been in the last, I guess, few years that I felt more free to um, to speak, and it scares me because I used to be manuscript only and reading, and I feel there's a comfort there, right? Like you've already gone through all those words and you feel comfortable with those words. That's the reason you want to read them. That's the reason you want to give them. But what that also does is make, for me, what it makes is the delivery more sterile. Um, and so I think sometimes it's good to find a balance between that manuscripting it and having those moments where you can kind of almost take the jacket off, you know, and speak freely about a point or two to where your audience sees that this is a real thing that's happening inside of us and not just something we're speaking about. And I don't think that you've come across that way at all. But I think for me, when I look at like how I have transitioned in how I present, I feel a comfort level with manuscripting my sermons, but the delivery always takes a hit when I feel rigidly constrained to my manuscript. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes, yeah. I guess it would be helpful to include, yeah, for me right now, I use a manuscript and I've changed it over the course of the semester where I think at the beginning it was just a plain manuscript, but then I started creating like page breaks for points. I would bold things if I wanted to emphasize them. And then also like in the midst of paragraphs, I would like insert a couple of like blank spaces to kind of like give a pause. But I feel like at the same time, it still maybe seems maybe too mechanic or, you know, so I think that's helpful as far as thinking about my manuscript and how that may inform my delivery. So that's helpful.
One observation I found from watching the sermons of Nicholas and Thomas, like this week, for example, I mean, the second sermon, like now that I mean, even Anthony, you yourself, when I watch your sermons, your delivery was, I mean, from my evaluation was you're great. You know, your delivery was really great. And I could feel like you're really having a comfortable and calming voice so that audience can, when I listen to your voice, and I could more engage and focus on your message itself instead of watching like, you know, hand gestures and following moves out, you know, other preachers would do. But the difference between like Anthony, you and Nicholas and Thomas, I found it the Nicholas and Thomas more use like hand gestures, and it's not a bad thing at all. I think it's really great. And you know, their voice, and Nicholas, for example, his voice and his tone was really conversational, and it's not like an, you know, oh, I'm a preacher, I'm giving a sermon right now, kind of that kind of tone that he said, but it's like he more, you know, directly talking to someone like in conversation. So I feel like, oh, it's more comfortable to listen to. And then Thomas as well, he's very passionate and powerful. I could hear through his voice when he started up his sermon in this week. So I feel like, wow, that's the very powerful message. And Nicholas is really conversational and very comfortable to listen to. And then one thing in common, this two, Nicholas and Thomas and had in their sermons, was they start off with their personal story in their sermon. So I feel like when they talking about their personal story in the sermon, I feel like they're more getting comfortable and easily engaged in their story. So from that, they developed well to their main point. You know, for Thomas, for example, you know, developed to the Jonah story. So I feel, wow, so that's the good illustration and transition. So made a good delivery, I think.
Tim, I've never thought about it like that, but that's absolutely right. When I tell a story at the start, I mean, it's the hook. I mean, it's a hook. It's a narrative hook.
Yeah.
But it very much is me like stepping in comfortably, trying to step into what I'm doing and what I'm saying. And yes, so sometimes, I mean, it's a silly story or something, but there
That's
is
really on point, I think. Yeah.
there's a part of it. It's like helping me open to open up into it. But Anthony, I was thinking about your question. One of the hardest parts for sermon prep for me is, and I think you said you do this, but printing out the text on a piece of paper and reading it like through the text. So I do that. I use Bible Gateway, and I try to get rid of subtitles. I try to get rid of chapter numbers. I keep the verse numbers sometimes, but I try to get rid of that so that I'm reading it as naturally in one sense as I can. And one of the things, and this is so hard for me to do, because especially if it's a Thursday and my pastor asked me to preach on Sunday, the thing I want to do, I want to grab the text and just start finding where my point's going to be. Like, just immediately start cramming my points into the text. And because I know I've got to get this done. So for me, it's like, bottom line, how am I getting this done? And so then I can start working on delivery and all of these other things. But one of the things I think is most important is to print out the text and read the text. Like, let the text preach to you. For me, I really struggle with that because I'm trying to get something done, and I have to step back and say, well, actually, I need this text as much as the congregation needs it, if not more so. And so so I try to head into it and not point divide initially. Like, I just try to stew in the text. And if you have a week, it's best to do what you like. I think it's great that you spend 2/3 of your time in the text. I think that's so important because it keeps it central. I asked my pastor, when do you sermon prep? And he told me, I never stop. So he basically, like, his point is, like, the whole week he is just stewing in and internalizing the text and trying to make it as personal as possible for him. Because I think at the end of the day, Anthony, you can't not be Anthony. Like, don't try to be John Piper or try to be Matt Chandler or try to be David Platt. I think at the end of the day, like, you will be most confident in being Anthony, and I think that's a good thing. And so that may not mean that you are as it may, your style will be different than Timothy's or Nick's. One thing that I might suggest that I really have tried to grow in this year, I'm really uncomfortable with tension in my messages, and I need to get better about that, because it's really, really important for the audience, I think, to build tension, to ask a question at the start that may be a really hard or an uncomfortable question, and not to answer it immediately. Like, let it sit so that the audience is, like, listening. And because I don't think that's the way that the text works either. Like, I don't think that the text always answers immediately. I mean, you have Pharisees who ask Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? Jesus doesn't say everybody. He like tells a story, and so I think even following how Jesus models his messages, being okay with silence, asking a question and letting it sit, and I think for us, we feel the pain, like the sharpness of silence, because we're speaking more than our audience, but being okay with just letting that sit there like that. You don't really have to change your like voice or get like really like hand gestures or anything like that. It's just letting the being silent for a minute and letting that sit there is good. But yeah, I think the other thing, Anthony, what did you say earlier? Your thing, Anthony, though, is really good about letting your voice or your who you are match with the text, because at the end of the day, you're a mouthpiece. Like, you're trying to be used by God to exposit His text, His word. So, and plus, I think, Nick, maybe you said this, you just kind of grow in confidence the more you do it. Repetition is just helpful. And that's one of the blessings that I think with students, Nick, I don't know if you feel the same way, but like, you can really mess up with students. Like, you can flat out fail and face plant in a message. And you know, you just kind of,
yeah, they'll be like, hey, that was great.
yeah, you just kind of keep going. And so, I mean, I've done that a bunch. And so that kind of frees you up a little bit. You know, you can do that with kids sometimes too. And so, not that you don't like, I'm not saying you don't prep for it. I'm just saying I've tried stuff with students before that I'm like, nope, that is not me. And that can never happen again. And, you know, I've tried other stuff that I'm like, oh, that is more like me. And so just trying different things has been helpful.
I heard a quote from Timothy Keller where he said, your first 200 sermons are just going to be bad. And I was like, that's so encouraging, Timothy. Like at 201, I'll feel good. But I think at the heart of it is like, I do feel like, and you guys may have experienced this, and maybe you, Tim, more so than the others, because I know that you guys are regularly teaching, but just having more opportunities has just been drastic. Now, I don't think that means that I've gotten like better in all ways. You know, I think like the sermon for this week was weak in some areas that I thought maybe were strong in like previous ones. But as I look at the whole, like I feel more comfortable. I feel like they're getting better in different ways. So anyways, I just found that encouraging from Timothy Keller, but I'm just waiting to hit 201.
I think something that Timothy said earlier about the illustration up front, um, Thomas is right. There is a sense that I have to be comfortable with my audience. And sometimes those illustrations, they set the mood, they set the tone for my comfort level. And oftentimes when I give an illustration up front, it's so that I have to convince myself that I need this too, that I'm not here and I'm speaking to people down here, that this is us together growing in Christ. And I'm not presenting them something that they need that I don't. I haven't arrived in any way, but these people are on the same page with me in that. And so sometimes those illustrations, those personal illustrations, really convinces me that we as a congregation are in this together. And one of the questions that I ask myself, and I do this now, is when I'm preparing a sermon, I know this is information that they need to hear. As a person called in the ministry, we're going to be spending time scouring the text and looking through it and making sure that we're going to get all the good information, the right information, all the teaching moments inside of there. We're going to get everything that we can. So I'm going to present them information that they need to hear, but am I presenting it in a way that they want to hear it? Those are two different things. And of course, not always can you present things where people want to hear it. But I do think that in our presentations, we need to be winsome. Our presentations of any truth need to be winsome to those who are not saved and to the saints. And so I always want to make sure that the truth is packaged, not changing the truth at all, not changing the truth, but it's packaged in a way that is winsome. That's not like a hierarchy of this is knowledge that you'll get to someday, guys. This is no. I want them to realize that this is knowledge that we all need and we all need to grow together with. And one other thing, Thomas, you said that you struggled with tension and building tension in your sermons, and I just wanted to encourage you. Your last sermon, I believe it was your last sermon in Jonah. You asked two very key questions that I thought were excellent. You asked the question, have you ever had this moment, or have you ever recognized this moment? And then your second question, oh, I've got it right here. Let me look at it. Your second question, have you known this moment, is your first. And then you said, have you ever found yourself in a pattern of rebellion? And man, those are two great questions that cause tension, internal tension into the hearing. And I just encourage you. Um, so I'm an old Ray Comfort guy. I love the Way of the Master and stuff like that. And I think sometimes with the intellect is the place of argumentation. The intellect where we're presenting intelligent things, that's where people just turn you on or turn you off. But when you ask questions like that, you're going to the heart, and the heart is the place of change. It's the conscience that we hit. And so when you ask those questions, it really makes someone listen. And that question about, have you ever found yourself in a pattern of rebellion? Man, that's a powerful question inside of your sermon.
Yep. Thanks. No, that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been encouraged by my pastor had us read The Deliberate Church by Mark Dever. And one of the quotes that I remember from that book is he says that what you win them with is what you win them to. And I've found that like it's such a great quote, but like a lot of times you have to have wisdom in how you define winning somebody over. Like you kind of project what you think, you know what I mean? So I think it's really good that what the things that you're saying, Nicholas, because I think the approach really needs to be balanced. Like I think some people can be tempted to think that like, well, if I want to win them with the gospel, it just needs to be just like strict doctrine teaching, like let's get into the Greek, let's get in, yada, yada, yada. But it have difficulty really engaging them in their, in their daily lives and communicating to them that like the Lord is personal and he wants this to really apply to how you're going to act, the next, rest of the years of your life, or like your shift that you're about to go work on. And so I found that quote really helpful, that like, you don't want to change the truth, but you want to communicate it in a manner that's, given your context, really engaging. But that, there can be temptations, right, to like win them with just like humor, and then you just win them to humor and not the gospel, So I think you're right in the balancing those things. So.
What minute are we at, Nick?
Yes, I have no idea. I had this thing pop up on my screen that says Zoom is extending your 40-minute time limit. So I have I don't know.
It must have been that great of a conversation. So
That's right.
add it on there.
Somebody at Zoom is watching this with us.
So question,
being encouraged.
Where are y'all in the, I guess in your seminary education? And then this is probably like another way of reminder, because it was probably in the discussion that we had in the beginning, but like, are y'all wanting to stay in the ministry context that you're in? Or are you guys looking to, like, I know a couple of you guys are doing youth stuff. Are you guys wanting to transition to something else after you're done with your seminary education?
I'm looking for a transition, actually. I'm expecting to graduate next spring semester. So just one semester away. But as soon as I graduate, I expect to be accessioned as a chaplain.
Yeah.
Army chaplain. But I'm going to stay as in the reserve. So meanwhile, I can focus on my civilian ministry as well. But in the civilian ministry side, I'm planning to focus on more overseas missionary work. Like for example, last 3 years, and I've been to Philippines and Taiwan for mission work, and I held some a series of Bible seminars there. So it was really good reactions there. So I think I would more focus on those. At the same time, I'm trying to do, like, I came across and recently that a lot of preachers and even like missionaries who are not actually serving in a congregation, I saw there are some YouTubers and they have some using a social media as one of the platforms to preach the gospel through that. So I think I haven't visualized in like what forms specifically I have to make, but that one I'm definitely want to try on. Yeah. So maybe that transition like that. Yeah. What about you guys?
I'll be done in May, hopefully. I've only got a couple more classes left. So guys, I cannot wait to be done. I'm just telling you. I mean, I've loved it, but I'm done. I'm just tired. Right now, I am a house parent for teenage boys. I have up to 7 teenage boys that live with me. I've got my personal family of 4. I've got this part-time job at the church, part-time youth pastor gig, and I'm full-time in seminary right now. I'm just tired. Like I just want some sleep. When I get done with seminary, I really don't know. It's frustrating for my family when they ask, so what do you want to do when you're done? And I really don't know. I know that I want to be a resource for the church, whatever that is. And but I have to be honest and tell you that the the few times that I've been full time in a church, my ministries have been very, very difficult, very hard. I've had very hard pastors, and I've seen my wife get hurt. I mean, I've personally been hurt in church, and so being a pastor scares me. I mean, it is something that I believe that I have a heart for, but it's something that scares me. And so trusting a congregation to care for my wife is a difficult thing for me. And so if I'm not saying that no to being a pastor when I'm done, but I will say that it is something that definitely scares me.
I am. I'll be done in 3 weeks.
Wow.
So I'm about to graduate. I think. I hope, assuming everything goes well. Yeah, I'm just very. I'm very thankful for. I'm very thankful for seasons, and I'm thankful for the closings of some seasons. And like you, Nick, it's been a good season. I mean, I've grown, I think, a lot in a lot of ways. But it's been a hard time. I've had 2 I've had 1 full-time job and then part-time job with students at the church, and so I eventually, like right now my wife works, so I really want her to be able to come home. We're about to have our first, and so we're very excited, and so a lot of changes coming up for me. I there's a sense I love the church where I am. I love the context in which I'm serving, love the congregation, very, very thankful for them. At some point, financially, I think that a goal for my family is that I would be able to work and make enough to where I can provide and have insurance, all that stuff. And right now, we're both working, and which is fine for where we are. But with the closing of this season, yeah, I would look for some kind of transition here in the next year or so. I hope that it can be at the same church. I hope that it can become more of a full-time thing. But I don't know. I'm like you, Nick. Like I've got uncles and relatives going, "What are you gonna do when you?" And sometimes that drives me crazy. The whole like, when you're out of seminary, when are you actually gonna start ministry? And I'm like, oh, that's not how it works. It's hard to explain that to people sometimes. But I am looking forward to a transition eventually financially. But I mean, we love the church where we are, and so. But yeah. What about you, Anthony? Did you ask that question?
Yeah, I did. Are you walking in December?
Yes, walking in
All
December.
right. All right. So I, Lord willing, will graduate in December as well.
Awesome.
So we will walk together. Yeah. So yeah, this is my last semester, and yeah, we're looking to transition as I've done my education. My wife has worked as well. And then I've just kind of done little things here and there, very involved at our church, helping the pastors with like pastoral care things. I'm a ministry assistant there. And so we love our local congregation. We'd love to stay as well. But we know that there's not like a position there. So there's just not a need for a position. And so, so we kind of want to do the same thing, transition to where I'm able to, provide, and she doesn't have to work as much. And so we're looking at options for that. I've applied to a church already, and so I'm in the process there. And so we'll see. Well, I may hear something at the end of the year about that. But as far as that, we don't really know what's going to come up. So if that doesn't work out, we might just have a season where I'm just working, I don't know, some job cleaning floors or something like that. And we're just continue to attend at the church and serve where we're at. So that's us.
Hey, I did want to ask one more question, and this is a strange question, um, but it's something that I struggle with, and I just wanted to hear you guys respond to this. Does preaching scare you? Preaching terrifies me. It just scares me.
When's the like? Is it like a tear like right before you go up, or throughout like from prep to like when's it hit you?
Okay, I'll give you a little bit more. So the idea and concept of speaking as an ambassador for the Lord scares me. Like I want to get things so right. That's why in my earlier days I would manuscript and I'd go over it and make sure that everything was right. And now I feel like I've had to give myself a little bit more freedom, so that it was more winsome. I guess that's the word. Um, but it just the whole concept um, of preaching, like it's just something that just scares me. And so every time I get up there, every time I begin to preach, just this overwhelming sense of you're speaking on behalf of God. Do it well.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
guys got that thought?
yeah, I think for me, yeah, I feel that I think it kind of, like it expresses itself in like going over my manuscript like a whole bunch of times. But I think another thing is I often like maybe the night before feel like helpless to preach unless the Lord does something. So I find that like that I feel like that can make you run in two different directions, right? And the Lord has been gracious to help me to run to like prayer, and just being like, hey, if you don't speak, like nothing's going to happen. So I need you to speak tomorrow. And so that's been an assurance in the midst of my fears. But yeah, I think I feel like the same nervousness. I think you're right that maybe even some of my nervousness on the sun, like in the midst of preaching, is like physical. I might be getting a dry mouth because of the nerves, but I think at the same time I've had the Lord's just been gracious to kind of point me into humility and dependence in the midst of those things. But yeah, I would say that's a shared feeling, and I think that's some part to just not having frequent opportunities to do it. So.
I mean, it is a, I mean, it's remarkable. It's remarkably weighty. It is a very weighty task that we're aspiring to and doing, and so yeah. I mean, I think there's a healthy sense of neediness in light of the weightiness. And I think that's Anthony, I think you're right. For me, it hits me right before I start typing notes for prep. It just hits me like when I don't have all of my moves, when I'm not, when I don't, can't clearly articulate what I want to see accomplished in the hearts of the hearers, like all of the like questions to kind of structure my prep. Yes, I feel a strong sense of inadequacy, and that in a lot of ways shapes, I think can inform a kind of fear in me. Sometimes I try to step back and see, is it a dread? And if it is a dread, why is it a dread? There have been times where I've been really afraid just in my vanity, like, what are people going to think? Are people going to like it? Are people going to like me? Are people going to want me to preach again? Or like, sometimes I kind of, just as a younger guy, like I just stew on those questions, oftentimes in an unhealthy manner. I kind of want to make it sound like I'm talking to you all. I kind of want to make it sound a little more holy than it is, with feeling inadequacy and running to the Lord. But a lot of times, I'm thinking, what's my pastor gonna think, or what's this person gonna think? Sometimes I stick on those questions, and so I fear. So the two polar, like one sinful and one rightly, like there's a sense in which I fear, a kind of fear over preaching of the weightiness of it, and then the other side, in my pride, I am like I think about what other people are gonna think about me, which is not a good thing for a preacher, because you're preaching God's word, and you better believe it's going to offend people. If I'm going into this to make allies, then I've got the wrong profession. Like I can do something, I can speak in another context and get people to like me more than I will if I try to preach. And so I think for me, like that, I love that question, Nick, because I think that has exposed my own vanity. Um, and then I find that I try to package it in a way that makes it sound holy. But
I think for me, I would say it's more right to say it's more pressure to stand in front of the whole, congregation and giving a sermon, rather than, I mean, it's kind of scary, but also more pressure, and I have pressure and I have excited, every time I stand up. But I mean, to be honest, and I came to the States like 2011, and I was born and raised in Korea, so my first language is Korean. But whenever I have to give a sermon in English and as a second language, it's more, you can imagine more pressure on me, right? Because I worried about the way I speak, and what if I stutter, during the sermon? What if the people then, distrust my message? What if I fail in delivering my message the way I want it to be? I thought about so many times, and even in every single times before I stand up in the pulpit. But at the end, every time it teaches me that it's not who I am people actually watching. It's not who I am people try to see. It's the message itself they try to listen to through myself, through me. So yeah, I cannot say I completely overcome this challenge, but one thing I learned is, as long as you're truthful to your text and truthful to your message, then the delivery will definitely gonna come out, very naturally, and the Lord will, will help and protect you and provide the wisdom in timely manner and during your sermon. So as long as you're engaged in this, delivering your message during the sermon, then it definitely, it will be okay. So one thing I learned is I entrust my all anxiety and nervousness to the Lord before, I go to preach. Then it helped a lot for me. Yeah.
That's really helpful stuff, guys. Um, Thomas, I really appreciate you bringing out just how you want to impress your pastor and checking yourself on that. I think I feel the same way, and I don't want to. My question really comes from a place where I love. My desire is to preach. My desire is there, but I'm just afraid of it. And so as I'm coming, like, and you guys too, as you're coming to the end of seminary, thinking about the potential of a church calling you, um, it's just something that gives me fear. Um, and it's good to see that um, other guys are struggling and going through this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like, as you know, just a healthy aspect of fear, like a healthy understanding of the weightiness. And I think oftentimes in the midst of it, if it's not drawing you to the assurance or like comfort or dependence on the Lord, then it's something really to be like scared of. Like, okay, like where am I running to, and where am I going in the midst of it? But I mean, I think I agree with every kind of form of ministry that we have, especially when it comes to teaching, you know, and proclaiming God's truth. There's just such a weightiness to it, to be accurate and to be engaging and stuff like that, that I don't know, in one aspect, probably shouldn't ever be able to shake off. So, yeah. Well, do you guys think it'd probably be best to close at this point? Getting kind of late, seeing some yawns. Would somebody mind praying for us, just as in our ministries and just our preaching ministries as well? If not, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
All right, let me pray. Lord, we thank you for tonight, and God, we thank you for this preaching fellowship that we've been able to partake in because of our class. And we thank you for Southern Seminary and their conviction around your word and your truths. We thank you for this season that we have been able to study your word, God, to be surrounded by men who have been in your word longer than some of us have even been alive. And God, we've been able to glean their wisdom from ministry and their heart for young men, training for whatever form of ministry you have for us. We pray that you would continue to be with us and encourage us as we continue to serve in the churches and the ministries that we're a part of. And Lord, we pray that you would help us to grow as preachers and teachers of your word. God, that we would image your son Jesus in the midst of it. And God, that you would bear much fruit through our ministries. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, brothers.
All right,
Thank y'all
thanks,
very
guys.
much.
Hey, do y'all
All right,
know
thank
where
you
this
so much,
video
guys.
needs to be uploaded?
Unsure.